The blood on her father's collar was still fresh when Valentina Everett threw open the carved double doors of the Shadow-End Court and screamed the words that would change her life forever. "Take me instead of my father." Every immortal face in the grand hall turned toward her. She stood trembling in the entrance, chest heaving, her dark hair wild from the sprint through midnight streets. The vampires watched her with eyes that gleamed like polished gems in the candlelight, predatory and ancient. But Valentina kept her gaze fixed on the figure seated at the end of the hall, the one whose presence seemed to swallow all the air from the room. Bastien Sinclair, vampire king of the Eastern Territories, sat upon a throne of black obsidian. His white hair fell past his shoulders like a waterfall of moonlight, and his skin held the pale luminescence of marble come to life. He wore black velvet and silver, regal as any monarch from history, and his crimson eyes assessed her with an intensity that made her knees weak. But she refused to look away. Behind her, 2 vampire guards dragged her father forward. Marcus Everett looked nothing like the strong, laughing man who had raised her alone after her mother's death. His face was bruised, his accountant's suit torn and stained. When he saw Valentina, his expression crumpled with despair. "Valentina, no," he choked out. "Run. Please, just run." She ignored him, walking forward with her chin high, despite the terror coursing through her veins. The vampires lining the hall whispered to each other in languages she didn't recognize, but she caught the curiosity in their voices. A human girl, barely 22 years old, walking uninvited into the vampire king's court to bargain for her father's life. She must look like a fool to them. She stopped 10 feet from the throne, close enough to see the sharp angles of Bastien Sinclair's face, the cruel beauty of his mouth, the intelligence burning in those red eyes. He leaned forward slightly, studying her like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected. "You offer yourself in exchange?" His voice was silk and smoke, carrying easily through the massive hall. "Do you understand what that means, little human?" "I understand my father was caught embezzling from one of your businesses," Valentina said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I understand he was desperate to pay for my mother's medical bills before she died last year, and that he made a terrible mistake. I understand that vampire law demands his death for stealing from the court." She swallowed hard. "But I also understand that I'm young and healthy, and my life must be worth more than his. He's all I have left. Please, I'll do anything. I'll serve you, work for you, whatever you want. Just let him go." A vampire woman to Bastien's left laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Bold little thing, isn't she? Does she even know what typically happens to humans who volunteer themselves to our kind?" Bastien raised one elegant hand, and instant silence fell. He rose from his throne with fluid grace, descending the 3 steps to the floor. He moved like water, like shadow, and suddenly he was standing directly in front of Valentina. This close, she could see the faint blue veins beneath his translucent skin, could smell something like winter frost and old books. He towered over her, radiating power that made her instincts scream at her to flee. Instead, she held her ground. "Your father stole $17,000 over 6 months, Bastien said quietly, for her ears only. He falsified records, created fake accounts, and funneled money from Sinclair Holdings into his own pockets. By our law, the punishment is death. By human law, it would be years in prison." He tilted his head. "Why should I accept your life in place of his when I could simply take both?" The brutal honesty of it stole her breath. But Valentina had always been her father's daughter, and Marcus Everett had raised her to be brave. "Because you're a king," she said softly. "And kings are supposed to value mercy alongside justice. Because you've ruled for centuries, and surely you've seen that fear and desperation make people do terrible things. Because—" Her voice wavered, but she pushed on. "Because maybe, somewhere in your immortal heart, you remember what it's like to love someone enough to die for them." Something flickered across Bastien's face, too quick for her to read. He stared at her for a long moment, and the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Then he reached out and took her hand. His fingers were cool against her skin, his grip gentle but unbreakable. He turned her hand over, studying her palm as if reading her future there. "I accept your offer," he said, loud enough for the entire court to hear. "But not as a servant, not as a slave." His red eyes met hers, blazing with something she couldn't name. "You will be my wife." The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Valentina's father cried out in anguish behind her, but Valentina herself could only stare at the vampire king in disbelief. "Your wife?" she managed. "You offered anything," Bastien reminded her, a hint of dark amusement in his voice. "I have decided what I want. You will marry me, live as my queen, and bind yourself to me for as long as you draw breath. In return, your father will be pardoned, his debt forgiven, and he will be placed under my personal protection. No vampire in my territory will touch him." He squeezed her hand once. "Do we have an agreement, Valentina Everett?" She should refuse, should run. The idea of marrying this beautiful, terrifying creature was insane, but when she glanced back at her father, saw the despair and love in his eyes, she knew there was only one answer she could give. "Yes," she whispered, "we have an agreement." Bastien smiled then, and it was like watching winter sunrise, cold and stunning. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles that sent shivers racing up her arm. "Then let it be witnessed," he declared to the court. "This human woman is now under my protection as my future bride. Anyone who harms her will answer to me." His voice dropped to a lethal softness. "And I promise you, the answer will not be pleasant." The vampires bowed their heads in acknowledgement, and Valentina realized with dawning horror and strange excitement that her old life had just ended. Her new one as the Vampire King's bride was about to begin. 2 hours later, Valentina sat in a bedroom that looked like it belonged in a palace. The walls were covered in deep burgundy silk, the furniture all dark wood and silver inlay. The bed could have fit 5 people, piled high with pillows and blankets that probably cost more than her entire apartment. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the glittering lights of the city spread out below. They were somewhere high up, in what appeared to be a penthouse built into the top floors of an old cathedral, renovated and transformed into something between Gothic castle and modern luxury. She'd been allowed to say goodbye to her father. Marcus had held her tight, crying against her hair, begging her forgiveness. She'd told him she loved him, that everything would be all right, that he should go home and rest. Bastien had assigned 2 vampire guards to escort him safely back to his apartment and ensure no one troubled him. Then her father had been gone, and she'd been led here by a silent female vampire with silver eyes who had locked the door behind her. Now Valentina sat on the edge of the enormous bed, still wearing the jeans and sweater she'd thrown on when her father's panicked phone call had woken her. Her hands shook as the reality of what she'd done crashed over her. She'd promised to marry the Vampire King. A king who could kill her with one hand, who drank blood to survive, who was old enough to have seen empires rise and fall. What did he even want with a human wife? The question terrified her almost as much as the answer might. A knock at the door made her jump. Before she could respond, it opened, and Bastien stepped inside. He'd removed the formal velvet jacket, now wearing only black trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. It should have made him look more human, more approachable. Instead, it only highlighted the otherworldly perfection of his form, the predatory grace in every movement. He closed the door behind him and regarded her with those unsettling crimson eyes. "You're afraid," he observed, not a question. "Wouldn't you be?" Valentina challenged, lifting her chin. "I just agreed to marry someone I've never met, someone who isn't even human. Most would consider that a poor decision." Bastien crossed the room to a crystal decanter on the sideboard, pouring himself something dark red. "Blood," Valentina realized with a shudder. He noticed her reaction and set the glass down untouched. "I won't drink in front of you if it disturbs you." The consideration surprised her. "I thought vampires didn't care about human sensibilities." "I'm not most vampires." He leaned against the sideboard, studying her. "And you're not most humans. You walked into my court alone, unarmed, and demanded I show mercy. Then you offered your life without hesitation when I named my price. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Maybe both, Valentina admitted. Why did you accept? And why marriage? You could have just taken me as a servant like I suggested. Bastien was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Do you know how long I've ruled the Eastern Territories? No. 347 years. I was turned in 1679, and I took power in 1712 after the previous king fell to a hunter's blade. He spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing last week rather than centuries past. In all that time I have never taken a wife, never bound myself to anyone. The court has pressured me for decades to marry, to create alliances through blood bonds with other vampire houses. I've refused them all. Then why now? Valentina pressed. Why me? His eyes caught hers, intense and searching. When you stood before me tonight, do you know what I saw? A woman willing to sacrifice everything for love, pure, selfless love for her father. It's rare enough among humans, but among vampires? He shook his head. We live so long, Valentina. We see so much death, so much betrayal. Love becomes a commodity, something traded for power or survival. But you... He pushed off from the sideboard, taking a step closer. You offered your life like it meant nothing compared to saving his. In 3.5 centuries, I've never seen anything like that. Valentina's heart hammered in her chest. That doesn't explain why you want to marry me. Doesn't it? A hint of a smile touched his lips. I am surrounded by immortals who scheme and plot, who see only power and politics. You are something different, something real. He paused. And perhaps I'm tired of being alone. The raw honesty in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, he didn't sound like an ancient vampire king. He sounded like someone who had lived too long with no one to truly share it with. What would this marriage mean? She asked quietly. What would you expect from me? You would live here, as my queen. You would attend court functions at my side, represent me in political matters, learn our ways. He held her gaze. I would expect loyalty, companionship, and in time, perhaps affection. What I would not expect is your immediate love or trust. Those must be earned, even for a king. And, physically? The word came out barely above a whisper. Understanding flickered in his eyes. I will not force myself on you, Valentina. Ever. You have my word. He said it like a vow, formal and binding. When and if you welcome me to your bed, it will be because you choose it freely. I have no interest in an unwilling partner. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that tears pricked her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me for basic decency. His voice softened slightly. I know I'm asking something enormous of you. The least I can offer is patience and respect. She studied him, this powerful creature who had just promised not to hurt her and felt the first stirrings of something that might eventually become trust. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you even believe in love? Real love, I mean, not just political alliances. Bastien was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. I was 26 when I was turned, he said. I had a wife then, a human wife. Her name was Eleanor, and I loved her more than my own life. Pain flickered across his face, ancient but still sharp. She died 3 months after my transformation. I was still new, still struggling with the bloodlust, and I lost control one night. I killed her. He looked away. So yes, Valentina, I believe in love. I also believe in the pain it causes. Horror and sympathy warred in Valentina's chest. I'm sorry. It was over 300 years ago, but some wounds never fully heal, even for immortals. He turned back to her. I tell you this, so you understand. I know what I'm capable of, both the protection I can offer and the danger I pose. If you want to leave, if you want to break our agreement, I will let you go. Your father will still be pardoned. You have my word. He was giving her an out. After everything, he was giving her a choice. Valentina thought of her father, safe now because of Bastien's mercy. She thought of the loneliness in the Vampire King's eyes, the centuries of isolation he'd endured. She thought of the strange pull she felt toward him, curiosity mixed with fear, mixed with something she couldn't quite name. "I'll stay," she said firmly. "We made an agreement. I intend to honor it." Something warm flickered in Bastien's expression, there and gone like candlelight. "Then we should discuss the wedding. Vampire ceremonies are different from human ones." "How different?" "We'll need to exchange blood." Her stomach clenched. "You'll bite me?" "A small amount, mixed with wine, and you'll do the same to me. It creates a bond, allows me to sense if you're in danger, to find you if you're lost." He must have seen the panic in her face because he added quickly, "It won't turn you. Transformation requires far more blood than that, and it's a deliberate process. This will only link us." "Will it hurt?" "Less than you'd think, and I'll be as gentle as I can be." He moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "The ceremony will take place in 3 days. That gives you time to prepare, to say goodbye to your old life if you need to. You may visit your father, see friends, go anywhere in the city you like. I'll assign guards for your protection." "I'm not a prisoner?" "You're my future queen," Bastien corrected. "And you're free to move as you wish, as long as you're safe. The vampire world has rules, Valentina, but so does the human one. There are those who would harm you to get to me. I won't allow that." The protectiveness in his voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. 3 days, she repeated, trying to wrap her mind around it. "That's not much time." "We can wait longer if you prefer." She shook her head. "No. If we're doing this, there's no point in delaying." She met his eyes steadily. 3 days is fine." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from coldly beautiful to breathtaking. "You continue to surprise me, Valentina Everett." "Good," she said, matching his smile with a tentative one of her own. "I'd hate to be predictable." He laughed, the sound rich and genuine, and for the first time since entering the vampire court, Valentina felt like maybe, just maybe, she might survive this after all. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and surreal new experiences. Valentina woke the first morning to find an entire wardrobe of designer clothes hanging in the massive closet, all in her size. When she'd asked the silver-eyed vampire woman, who she learned was named Isadora and served as Bastien's second-in-command, how they'd known her measurements, Isadora had simply smiled and said, "We're vampires, dear. We're very observant." She spent the mornings with tutors, learning vampire etiquette and politics. There were dozens of vampire houses across the world, she discovered, each with their own territory and leader. The eastern territories included everything from Maine to Virginia, with Bastien's court seated in a renovated cathedral in Boston. His power was absolute here, but he maintained careful diplomatic relationships with the other vampire kings and queens who ruled their own regions. "Why do you need a human wife if vampire politics are so complicated?" Valentina had asked Isadora during one lesson. "Wouldn't a vampire queen make more sense politically?" Isadora had given her a knowing look. "Bastien has rejected every vampire match proposed to him for over a century. Trust me, this isn't about politics. This is personal." The afternoons were spent with her father. Marcus had been moved to a better apartment, courtesy of Bastien, and the fear had slowly faded from his eyes as he realized the vampire king truly meant to honor his word. He still felt guilty about Valentina's sacrifice, but she reassured him over and over that she was being treated well, that Bastien had been nothing but respectful. "He's not what I expected," she admitted to Marcus on the second day, sitting in his new kitchen over tea. "He's complicated, dangerous, yes, but also kind in his own way. And so alone, Dad. He's been alive for over 300 years, and he's been alone for most of it." Marcus had studied her face carefully. "You're starting to care for him. Is that crazy?" "Maybe. But you've always had a soft heart for wounded things." He'd squeezed her hand. "Just be careful, sweetheart. He may be kind to you now, but he's still a vampire, still a predator." She knew her father was right, but she also couldn't stop thinking about the pain in Bastien's eyes when he'd spoken of his first wife, the loneliness that clung to him like a shadow. The evenings belonged to Bastien himself. He would join her for dinner, eating human food he didn't need, but prepared exquisitely by the court's chefs. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He told her stories of the centuries he'd lived through, the changes he'd witnessed, the wonders and horrors of immortality. She told him about her life, her dreams of becoming a photographer, her love of old movies and chocolate cake. "You can still pursue photography," he'd said on the second evening when she'd mentioned giving up her courses at the community college. "Being my queen doesn't mean abandoning your passions. I'll have a studio built for you if you like." "You would do that?" "Valentina, I want you to be happy here, not trapped." He'd leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "A prisoner makes a poor companion. I'd much rather have a partner who chooses to stay." "Is that what we'll be? Partners?" "I hope so. In time." The way he looked at her when he said it made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Now, on the night before the wedding, Valentina stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection. Tomorrow, she would become the Vampire King's bride. The thought should terrify her. Instead, she felt a strange calm, as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff about to jump, trusting that there would be something to catch her fall. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Bastien entered, and her breath caught. He wore all black tonight, formal and regal, his white hair loose around his shoulders. He looked like something from a dream, beautiful and otherworldly. "I wanted to see how you were feeling," he said. "Tomorrow is a significant day." "Nervous," she admitted, "but not as terrified as I probably should be." He crossed to stand beside her, and they looked at their reflections together. The contrast was striking, his pale, immortal beauty next to her warm human features, his height dwarfing her smaller frame. "You'll be the most beautiful bride the court has ever seen," he said softly, "even though I'm human." "Because you're human." He turned to face her directly. "Vampires are cold, Valentina. Beautiful, yes, but cold. Like living statues. You're warm, alive, vibrant. You bring color into a world of shadows." His hand came up, hesitating just before touching her face. "May I?" She nodded, and his cool fingers traced her cheek with infinite gentleness. The touch sent electricity through her skin. "I want you to know something," Bastien said, his voice low and serious. "After tomorrow, you'll be linked to me. You'll feel what I feel when it's strong enough. Joy, anger, fear. The bond goes both ways, which means I'll feel your emotions too." He paused. "I'm telling you this now because I want you to understand what you're agreeing to. This isn't just a political marriage. The blood bond will tie us together in ways that are difficult to break." "Will I be able to read your thoughts?" "No, only emotions and only the powerful ones. But it means I'll know if you're ever in danger, if you're hurt or afraid. I'll be able to find you anywhere." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "Some would call it invasive. I call it protection." Valentina considered this. The idea of being that connected to someone should frighten her, but instead she felt oddly comforted. "Will you know if I'm happy?" "Yes." "Then you'll know I'm making this choice freely." She placed her hand over his where it rested against her face. "I could have run, Bastien. You gave me the chance, but I'm still here." "Why?" The question sounded almost vulnerable. "Why would you choose this?" She thought about lying, about giving him some practical answer about duty or gratitude, but something in his eyes demanded honesty. "Because when I look at you, I don't just see a vampire king," she said quietly. "I see someone who's been carrying the weight of the world alone for too long. Someone who showed my father mercy when he didn't have to. Someone who's been gentle with me even though you could easily be cruel." She swallowed. "And because when I'm with you, I feel like maybe I could be someone more than I've ever been. Someone brave and strong and important." Bastien's eyes blazed with something intense and hungry. "You're already all of those things. Then you help me see it." For a long moment they stood frozen, his hand on her face, her hand over his, the air between them charged with possibility. Valentina's heart raced, and she knew he could hear it, could probably smell the blood rushing through her veins. But there was no predator in his expression now. only want and wonder and something that looked almost like hope. "I should let you rest," he said finally, though he didn't move. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "Bastien?" "Yes?" "Thank you for giving me a choice, for treating me like a person, not just a bargaining chip." His smile was soft, almost sad. "You were never a bargaining chip, Valentina. From the moment you walked into my court, you were so much more." He leaned down, slowly enough that she could pull away if she wanted, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. His lips were cool against her skin, gentle as falling snow. "Sleep well, my brave girl." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Valentina touched her forehead where she could still feel the ghost of his kiss. Tomorrow she would become his wife, and she was surprised to realize she was looking forward to it. The ceremony took place at midnight, because vampires were nothing if not traditional. The grand hall had been transformed, hundreds of candles casting dancing shadows across the walls, black roses and silver ribbons decorating every surface. The vampire court assembled in their finest, all pale skin and jewel-bright eyes, watching as Valentina walked down the long aisle alone. She'd refused the traditional approach of being given away, insisting that she was choosing this herself. Bastien had understood immediately, and now she moved toward him with her head high, wearing a dress of deep crimson silk that flowed around her like blood and wine. It had been Isadora's choice, the vampire woman explaining that white was for human weddings, but vampire brides wore red. "For the blood bond," she'd said, "and because it looks magnificent against our coloring." It did look magnificent. Valentina felt like a queen already, powerful and beautiful, as she walked toward the man waiting for her at the altar. Bastien watched her approach with barely concealed awe. He wore black and silver, his white hair braided back from his face, and he looked like every fantasy prince from every story ever told. But the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the entire world, that was better than any fantasy. She reached him, and he took her hands in his. "You're stunning," he murmured, for her ears only. "So are you," she whispered back. The officiant, an ancient vampire with silver hair and kind eyes, began the ceremony in a language Valentina didn't recognize. Latin, maybe, or something older. She'd been told she didn't need to understand the words, only to follow Bastien's lead and accept the bond when it was offered. The ceremony moved through its phases, declarations and vows that Bastien translated for her in low tones. She repeated the words, promising loyalty and companionship, promising to stand beside him as his queen. He made his own vows to protect and cherish her, to honor her humanity, even as he bound her to his immortal life. Then came the blood exchange. The officiant brought forward a crystal goblet filled with dark wine. Bastien took a small ceremonial knife, the blade silver and wickedly sharp. He met Valentina's eyes. "Are you ready?" She nodded, her heart pounding but her resolve steady. He brought the knife to his own wrist first, making a quick, clean cut. Blood welled, impossibly red against his white skin, and dripped into the wine. The wound healed almost immediately, vampire regeneration sealing it closed. Then he offered her the knife. "Your turn, my brave queen." Valentina took the knife with trembling fingers. Before she could second-guess herself, she drew the blade across her palm. The pain was sharp, but brief, and Bastien caught her hand, tilting it so her blood joined his in the goblet. The wound throbbed, but then Bastien was wrapping her hand in white silk, his touch impossibly gentle. "I've got you," he murmured. The officiant swirled the goblet, mixing their blood with the wine until the liquid gleamed dark and strange in the candlelight. He offered it first to Bastien, who drank deeply, his eyes never leaving Valentina's face. Then the goblet passed to her. "Drink," Bastien said softly, "and accept the bond I offer." Valentina raised the goblet to her lips. The wine tasted of copper and spices, strange but not unpleasant. She drank it down, feeling warmth spread through her chest as she swallowed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world exploded with sensation. She gasped as she felt Bastien's presence flood into her awareness. Not thoughts, but emotions, powerful and overwhelming. Joy, so much joy it brought tears to her eyes. Relief, like he'd been holding his breath for centuries and could finally exhale. Possessiveness, fierce and protective, wrapping around her like armor. And underneath it all, threaded through everything else, something that felt dangerously close to love. Her own emotions must have hit him just as hard because his eyes widened and his hands tightened on hers. "Valentina," he breathed. "I feel you," she whispered, awed. "I can feel everything. And I can feel you." His voice was rough with emotion. "Your courage, your kindness, your light." He pulled her closer. "You're magnificent." The officiant was saying something, declaring them bound, but Valentina barely heard it. She was lost in the connection between them, this impossible bridge that linked her mortal heart to his immortal one. Then Bastien was cupping her face in his hands, leaning down, giving her one last chance to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she rose on her toes and met him halfway. Their first kiss was soft, almost tentative, his cool lips against her warm ones. But then, the bond flared between them, amplifying every sensation, and the kiss deepened. Bastien's arms came around her, pulling her against his chest, and she melted into him. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was his salvation, and she kissed him back with all the confusing, complicated feelings swirling in her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the court erupted in applause. "My queen," Bastien said, resting his forehead against hers. "My brave, beautiful queen." "My king," she replied, testing out the words. They felt right. "My unexpected king." He laughed, the sound full of joy, and kissed her again. The reception was a lavish affair with music and dancing and wine that flowed like water. Valentina was introduced to what felt like hundreds of vampires, all offering their congratulations and curiosity in equal measure. She could feel their judgment, their doubt that a human could truly be their queen, but she held her head high and smiled until her cheeks hurt. Through it all, Bastien stayed at her side, his hand at the small of her back, his presence a constant reassurance through their new bond. He deflected the ruder questions, steered her toward the friendlier court members, and made sure she always had food and water even when he couldn't partake himself. "You're doing wonderfully," he murmured during a brief quiet moment. "I know this is overwhelming." "It's like being in a beautiful nightmare," she admitted. "Everyone is so perfect, so graceful. I feel like I'm going to trip over my own feet. Then I'll catch you." He spun her into a dance as the music shifted, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. "And for the record, you're more beautiful than any of them. They're porcelain dolls frozen in time. You're alive." Dancing with him was effortless. He led her through the steps with centuries of practice, making her feel light as air. Through the bond, she could feel his pleasure at holding her, his pride in showing her off to his court, his protectiveness whenever anyone looked at her too long or too hungrily. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "That I'm human? That I'll age and die while you stay the same?" His expression grew serious. "It terrifies me," he admitted. "But we'll face that when we come to it. For now, I intend to treasure every moment I have with you." "What if I wanted to be turned, eventually?" He went very still. "Is that something you've considered?" "I don't know, maybe." She met his eyes. "I'm just trying to understand what our future looks like." "Transformation is not something to be taken lightly," Bastien said carefully. "It's painful, dangerous, and irreversible. Many don't survive it. And even if you did, you would lose your humanity, your warmth. You would become what I am." His jaw tightened. "I won't lie. Part of me wants to keep you with me forever. But another part of me thinks the world needs your light exactly as it is." "That sounds like a decision we should make together," Valentina said. "When the time comes." "Together," he agreed, and kissed her hand. The party continued until dawn began to threaten the horizon, and the vampires slowly filtered away to their windowless rooms and coffins. Bastien led Valentina back to their chambers, rooms that were now officially theirs to share. She stood in the center of the bedroom, suddenly nervous. They were married now, bound by blood and ceremony. This was their wedding night. But Bastien had promised not to pressure her, had promised to wait until she was ready. He seemed to sense her uncertainty through the bond. "I'll sleep in the adjoining room," he said gently. "You need rest, and I need to review some documents before I settle for the day. There's no pressure, Valentina. Not tonight, not ever." Relief and something that might have been disappointment warred in her chest. "Thank you for understanding." He crossed to her, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've waited 300 years for someone like you. I can wait a little longer for you to be comfortable with me." He kissed her forehead. "Sleep well, my queen." But as he turned to leave, Valentina caught his hand. "Stay," she said impulsively. Just stay. Talk to me until I fall asleep." The smile that broke across his face was radiant. "I would be honored." They settled onto the bed together, Valentina still in her red dress and Bastien in his formal clothes, lying side by side like children at a sleepover. He told her stories of the court, of vampire politics and ancient feuds, his voice low and soothing. She asked questions, learned names and histories, and felt herself relaxing against the pillows. Through the bond, she could feel his contentment, his happiness at this simple intimacy. It matched her own. "Bastien?" she murmured, half asleep. "Yes, my love." The endearment sent warmth through her chest. "I'm glad it was you. That night in the court. I'm glad it was you I offered myself to." His hand found hers, threading their fingers together. "And I'm glad you walked through those doors. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope." She fell asleep holding his hand, the vampire king watching over her as dawn broke over the city, and for the first time in a long time, Valentina felt completely safe. The next few weeks passed in a strange but pleasant rhythm. Valentina adjusted to her new life as vampire queen, learning the intricacies of court politics and vampire society. She attended meetings at Bastien's side, offering her perspective as a human when disputes arose between vampires and the mortal world. To her surprise, the court began to respect her judgment, valuing the insight she brought. She also discovered that being queen came with certain powers. Vampires who had once looked at her with hunger now treated her with careful deference. Bastien's protection extended absolutely, and anyone who even thought about harming her faced his wrath. She saw that wrath firsthand when a visiting vampire from the southern territories made the mistake of grabbing her arm too roughly during a disagreement. Bastien had the vampire pinned against the wall before Valentina could blink, his hand around the other man's throat, his eyes blazing with fury. "You touched my queen without permission," Bastien said, his voice deadly quiet. "Apologize, or I will remove your hand." "I meant no disrespect," the vampire choked out, eyes wide with terror. "Apologize to her, not to me." The vampire turned his frightened gaze to Valentina. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I forgot myself." Valentina could feel Bastien's rage through the bond, the fierce protectiveness that demanded blood for the insult. But she could also feel his control, the way he held himself back, waiting for her decision. "Let him go," she said softly. "He's apologized." Bastien released the vampire immediately, stepping back to Valentina's side. His hand settled on her arm where the other vampire had grabbed, gentle and possessive. "If you ever touch her again," he said to the cowering vampire, "I will kill you. Is that understood?" "Yes, my lord." "Perfectly." After the vampire fled, Bastien turned to Valentina with concern. "Did he hurt you?" "No, I'm fine." She touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "You can't kill everyone who's rude to me." "I can certainly try." Despite everything, she laughed. "You're ridiculous." "I'm protective." He pulled her close, breathing in her scent. Through the bond, she felt his fear, the terror that had spiked when someone had dared to touch her roughly. You're precious to me, Valentina. I won't apologize for defending you. I'm not asking you to apologize. Just maybe warn them first before you go for the throat. His lips quirked. I'll consider it. She shook her head, but she was smiling. The truth was, she'd never felt so cherished in her life. Bastien's protectiveness could be overwhelming, but it came from genuine care, and she was learning to appreciate it rather than fight it. Their relationship continued to deepen in other ways, too. They spent their evenings together, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Bastien told her about the world before modern technology, about hunting by moonlight and the beauty of a time without electric lights. She told him about photography and art, showing him the pictures she'd taken, and he'd commissioned that studio he'd promised, a whole room filled with the best cameras and equipment money could buy. They grew comfortable with casual touches, hands held during meetings, his arm around her waist at court functions, her head on his shoulder while they talked late into the night. The bond between them thrummed with growing affection, warming from simple companionship into something deeper. But they hadn't crossed that final line. Bastien kept his promise, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Some nights she could feel his desire through the bond, the want that spiked when she smiled or laughed, but he always kept himself in check, always gave her space. Until the night she decided she didn't want space anymore. It had been 6 weeks since the wedding. Valentina had spent the afternoon with her father, reassuring him again that she was happy, that Bastien treated her well. Marcus had slowly come to accept the situation, even meeting Bastien a few times and grudgingly admitting that the Vampire King seemed to genuinely care for his daughter. Now Valentina sat in the studio, editing photos on her computer while Bastien worked at the desk nearby, reading through reports from his territory. It was domestic and comfortable, and she realized with a start that she was completely, utterly happy. She was also in love with her vampire husband. The realization should have shocked her, but it didn't. It felt inevitable, like something that had been growing since the moment he'd taken her hand in the court and offered her mercy. She loved his fierce protectiveness, his dry humor, his unexpected gentleness. She loved the way he listened when she talked, the way he valued her opinions, the way he looked at her like she was the most important person in his world, and she was fairly certain he loved her too. She could feel it through the bond, that warm, fierce emotion that pulsed between them constantly now. He just hadn't said the words, and neither had she. Maybe it was time to change that. She stood up, crossing to where he sat. He looked up with a smile, but it faded when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, concern flooding the bond. "Nothing's wrong." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "I just realized something." "What?" "I love you." He went completely still, his red eyes wide with shock. "Valentina." "I'm in love with you," she continued, the words tumbling out now that she'd started. "I know it's only been 6 weeks, and maybe I'm crazy, but I can't help it. You're kind and protective, and you make me feel safe and valued and important. You gave my father mercy when you didn't have to. You've been patient with me, gentle with me, and I can feel how much you care through the bond. So yes, I love you, and I think you love me too." Bastien stood slowly, moving toward her like he was afraid she might disappear. "You think I love you? Don't you?" He laughed, the sound almost broken. "Oh, my darling girl, I've been in love with you since you walked into my court and demanded I show mercy. Maybe even before that, the moment you opened your mouth and offered your life for your father's." He cupped her face in his hands. "I love you desperately, completely, in a way I haven't loved anyone in over 300 years. I just didn't think you were ready to hear it." Joy exploded through her chest, amplified by the bond until she felt drunk with it. "I'm ready. I'm ready for all of it." Understanding darkened his eyes. "Valentina, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I want you, tonight, completely." She rose on her toes, bringing her lips close to his. "Make love to me, Bastien, please." He made a sound low in his throat, something between a groan and a prayer. "Are you absolutely certain? Because once I start, once I have you, I won't be able to pretend I don't want you every moment of every day." "Good," she whispered against his lips. Because I want you too. I'm yours, remember? You made me your wife. Now make me your lover. That snapped the last thread of his control. He kissed her deeply, hungrily, his arms banding around her as he lifted her against him. She wrapped her legs around his waist, and he carried her to the bedroom, never breaking the kiss. He laid her on the bed with reverent care, his hands shaking slightly as he began to unfasten her clothes. "You're sure?" he asked one more time. "I've never been more sure of anything." That was all the permission he needed. He made love to her slowly, worshipfully, taking his time to learn every inch of her body. His cool skin against her warmth created delicious contrast, and through the bond she could feel everything he felt, the wonder and desire and love amplifying her own until she thought she might shatter from the intensity of it. When they finally came together, when he filled her completely, the bond between them blazed so brightly she saw stars. She clung to him as he moved, feeling his pleasure mix with hers until she couldn't tell where she ended, and he began. "I love you," he gasped against her throat. "My queen, my heart, my everything." "I love you," she cried back, and the bond pulsed with the truth of it. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. She'd never felt so complete, so perfectly right. "That was," she started, unable to find words. "Transcendent," he finished. "You're transcendent, Valentina. You've brought me back to life." She tilted her head up to kiss him. "We brought each other back to life." He smiled, and in that smile she saw their future, the years they would spend together, the love that would only grow deeper, human or vampire, mortal or immortal, they would face it together. And that was enough. 3 months after their wedding, trouble came to the Eastern Territories. Valentina was in a council meeting when Isadora burst through the doors, her usually composed face tight with worry. "My lord, we have a situation. The Northern King has arrived and demands an audience." Bastien's expression went cold. "Draven is here? Now?" "With a full guard. He's in the main hall and refuses to leave until he speaks with you." Valentina felt tension spike through the bond. "Who is Draven?" she asked quietly. "The Northern King. Powerful, ancient, and not someone who shows up unannounced unless there's a serious problem." Bastien stood, offering her his hand. "You should meet him. You're my queen, after all." They walked together to the main hall, where a group of pale vampires in furs and silver stood waiting. At their center was a vampire who radiated power like Bastien did, with white hair even longer than her husband's and eyes like chips of ice. "Draven," Bastien greeted, his tone carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." The Northern King's gaze swept over Bastien before landing on Valentina. His eyes widened fractionally. "So it's true. You've taken a human bride." "I have. Valentina, this is King Draven Thornwood of the Northern Territories. Draven, my wife and queen, Valentina Sinclair." Using Bastien's last name still gave her a little thrill. She inclined her head politely. "Your Majesty." "A human queen," Draven repeated almost to himself. "Fascinating." Then his attention snapped back to Bastien. "We need to talk. Privately. Anything you say to me can be said in front of my queen." Draven's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Very well. There's a hunter organization operating in my territory. They call themselves the Crimson Cross, and they've been systematically targeting vampires for the past 6 months. We've lost 17 vampires to their blades, including 2 of my council members." Bastien's expression darkened. "Hunters? Working in coordinated groups? With advanced weapons, silver bullets, UV grenades, things we've never seen before." Draven's eyes glinted dangerously. "I've been tracking them, and I discovered their main bases here, in Boston, in your territory." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You're saying hunters are operating in my city and I didn't know about it?" "I'm saying they're clever. They've been using human fronts, legitimate businesses as covers, but they're here, and they're planning something big." Draven pulled out a folder, spreading photos across a nearby table. This building downtown, it's registered as a medical research facility, but my spies have confirmed it's their headquarters. Valentina leaned forward, studying the photos. The building looked ordinary enough, a modern glass and steel structure in the financial district, but there was something about it that made her uneasy. What are they planning? Bastien asked. That's what I need your help to find out, and to stop them before more of our kind die. Bastien was quiet for a long moment, and Valentina could feel him thinking through the bond, weighing options and dangers. If hunters are in my territory, they're my responsibility. I'll deal with them. I want to help, Draven said. This is bigger than territorial pride. These hunters are organized and well-funded. We should work together. Agreed. Bastien glanced at Valentina. I'll need to investigate this immediately. I'm coming with you, she said firmly. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. I'm your queen. If you're facing a threat, I face it with you. She met his eyes steadily. Besides, I'm human. I can get into places you can't during daylight hours. Draven made a sound of approval. She has a point. Hunters won't be watching for a human. Bastien looked like he wanted to argue, but through the bond, Valentina could feel his grudging acceptance of her logic. You stay behind me at all times, he said finally. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. The next few days were spent gathering intelligence. Valentina did indeed prove useful, visiting the suspicious building during the day under the guise of asking about medical trials. She wore a hidden camera that sent footage back to the court, giving them visual confirmation of what was inside. Hunters. Dozens of them, all armed and training in the building's lower levels. They're preparing for war, Isadora said grimly, reviewing the footage. Look at those weapons. They're not just hunting individual vampires anymore. They're going to attack the court, Bastien said. That's the only explanation for this level of preparation. Draven, who had been staying as a guest, nodded. The question is when. They got their answer that night when one of Bastien's scouts returned with urgent news. They're moving tonight, my lord. We intercepted their communications. They plan to attack at midnight. Bastien immediately began issuing orders, calling in every vampire in his territory who could fight. The court transformed into a fortress, windows reinforced, entrances barricaded. He tried to send Valentina away with her father to a safe house outside the city, but she refused. I'm not leaving you, she said stubbornly. We're in this together. Valentina, please. I can't fight if I'm worried about you. Then don't worry. Trust me to be smart and stay out of the way. She gripped his hands. I can feel your fear through the bond, but you can also feel my resolve. I'm not going anywhere. He pulled her close, holding her tight. If anything happens to you, it won't. You'll protect me. You always protect me. He kissed her fiercely, desperately, and she kissed him back, pouring all her love and faith through the bond. When midnight came, the hunters attacked. They came in force, dozens of armed humans pouring into the building with military precision. But Bastien had prepared well. Vampire warriors met them at every entrance, faster and stronger than any human could match. The battle was brutal and chaotic, the sound of gunfire mixing with screams and the clash of weapons. Valentina stayed in the secure room Bastien had insisted on, watching through security cameras as her husband fought. He was magnificent, moving through the hunters like death itself, his speed and strength overwhelming. Draven fought at his side, the two kings working in perfect synchronization despite their different territories, but then one of the cameras caught something that made Valentina's blood run cold. A group of hunters had broken away from the main fight, heading for the residential wing, heading for the room where Valentina's father had been brought for protection. She didn't think. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, the closest thing to a weapon she could find, and ran. Through the bond, she felt Bastien's sudden spike of alarm as he sensed her leaving the safe room. But she couldn't stop. Her father was in danger. She reached the residential wing just as the hunters were forcing open the door to her father's room. Marcus stood inside, trying to look brave despite his terror, holding a lamp like a weapon. "Get away from him!" Valentina screamed. The hunters whirled, surprised to see her. There were 4 of them, all armed with silver blades and guns. The human queen, one of them said, a woman with cold eyes. Perfect. We can use you as leverage. You're not touching her or my father. The woman laughed. You're brave, I'll give you that. But you're just a human girl. What are you going to do against us? What happened next happened fast. The hunter lunged for Valentina. She swung the fire extinguisher, catching the woman in the side. Another hunter grabbed her from behind, and she screamed, both in fear and through the bond, a psychic cry for help that she knew Bastien would feel. Then the wall exploded inward. Bastien came through it like a hurricane, his eyes blazing red with fury, his fangs bared. He tore the hunter off Valentina and threw the man across the room with enough force to shatter bones. The other hunters tried to fight, but they didn't stand a chance. Bastien was rage incarnate, protecting his mate with the full force of his ancient power. In seconds, all 4 hunters were down, unconscious or dead. Bastien spun to Valentina, pulling her into his arms. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands running over her, checking for injuries. "Did they touch you? Did they hurt you?" "I'm okay," she gasped. "Dad, is he—" "I'm fine, sweetheart," Marcus called from inside the room. "Thanks to you." Bastien crushed her against his chest, and through the bond she felt his terror, the absolute panic that had consumed him when he felt her danger. "Don't ever do that again," he said roughly. "Don't ever risk yourself like that. They were going to hurt my father. Then I would have handled it. That's my job, to protect you both." He pulled back enough to cup her face. "You scared me, Valentina. I felt your fear through the bond, and I've never been so terrified in my entire existence." "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I couldn't just hide while people I love were in danger." His expression softened slightly. "You are too brave for your own good. I learned from the best." He kissed her then, hard and claiming, and she melted into him. The rest of the battle was over within the hour. The hunters were defeated, those who survived taken prisoner for questioning. Draven's intelligence had been correct. They'd been planning a coordinated attack on multiple vampire courts, hoping to start a war that would wipe out vampire kind. But without their base and their leaders, the organization would crumble. In the aftermath, as dawn approached and the vampires began cleaning up and securing the building, Bastien held a meeting with Draven and the council. "We need to establish better communication between territories," Draven said. "This could have been much worse if we hadn't worked together." "Agreed," Bastien said. "I propose a formal alliance between the northern and eastern territories. Shared intelligence, coordinated defense." "And what does the human queen think?" Draven asked, looking at Valentina with newfound respect. "I hear you took on 4 hunters yourself to protect your father." Valentina, still shaken but trying to stay composed, met his gaze. "I think cooperation between territories makes sense, but I also think we need to address why hunters are organizing like this. They're scared of vampires, and fear makes humans dangerous. Maybe we need to work on peaceful coexistence rather than just defense." Silence fell. Then Bastien smiled, proud and amazed. "My queen makes an excellent point. Perhaps it's time to consider a different approach." Draven studied Valentina thoughtfully. "You chose well, Sinclair. She's wise beyond her years." "I know," Bastien said simply, taking her hand. They spent the rest of the night hammering out the details of the alliance and discussing potential outreach to human organizations. It was exhausting but important work, and Valentina felt proud to be part of it. When they finally made it back to their chambers, Bastien pulled her into his arms and just held her. "I meant what I said," he murmured against her hair. "You terrified me tonight." "I know. I felt it." She pulled back to look at him. "But you have to understand, I can't just be someone you protect. I need to be your partner in every way. That means sometimes I'll take risks." "I know, and I love you for your courage. He closed his eyes. "I lost Eleanor because I couldn't control myself. The thought of losing you too, of my world failing to protect you." "You won't lose me," she promised. "We're bonded, remember? I'm tied to you in ways that go beyond just being married. And I'm stronger than I look. You proved that tonight." He kissed her softly. "My fierce, brave queen." "Your partner," she corrected. "Yes," he agreed. "My partner," in everything. They made love that night with desperate intensity, reaffirming their bond, celebrating their survival. And when Valentina fell asleep in Bastien's arms, she felt the truth of their connection more strongly than ever. They were bound, truly and completely, and nothing would tear them apart. A year passed, then two. Valentina settled fully into her role as vampire queen, earning respect from even the most skeptical members of the court. She implemented new protocols for vampire-human relations, creating channels for peaceful resolution of conflicts. Several other vampire territories adopted her model, and slowly, the violence between humans and vampires began to decrease. Her father visited often, eventually finding companionship with Isadora of all people. The vampire woman and the human accountant formed an unlikely friendship that made both Valentina and Bastien smile. Marcus even started working for the court, helping manage the complex finances of vampire holdings. Valentina's photography flourished. She documented vampire life with her camera, creating a visual archive that would help future generations understand this hidden world. Bastien supported every project, giving her complete freedom to pursue her passion. Their love deepened with every passing day. The bond between them grew stronger, more intuitive, until they could sometimes communicate without words. Bastien became more open, sharing vulnerabilities he'd hidden for centuries. Valentina learned to balance her humanity with the demands of vampire society, never losing herself but growing into someone stronger. They talked about the future often, about what it would mean when Valentina aged and Bastien didn't. The question of transformation hung between them, never quite resolved. Until the night Valentina made her decision. They were in their private chambers, celebrating their second wedding anniversary. Bastien had given her a necklace with a ruby the size of her thumb, and she'd given him a photo album filled with pictures of their life together. "I've been thinking," she said as they lay in bed, her head on his chest, "about what comes next." "What do you mean?" "I'm 24 now. In another decade I'll start showing my age. In 2 decades I'll be middle-aged. In 4 or 5 I'll be elderly." She traced patterns on his skin. "And you'll still look exactly like this." He was quiet, his hand stilling in her hair. "We don't have to talk about this tonight." "Yes, we do, because I've made a decision." She pushed up to look at him. "I want you to turn me." Shock rippled through the bond. "Valentina." "I've thought about this carefully," she continued. "I know the risks. I know I might not survive, but I also know that I love you, and I want to spend eternity with you, not just a few short decades. I want to stand beside you as your queen for centuries, not just years. And I want to make that choice while I'm still young and strong enough to survive the transformation." Bastien sat up, his expression torn. "You would give up your humanity, your warmth, your mortality, everything that makes you who you are." "I'd be giving up aging and death. I wouldn't be giving up myself." She took his hands. "I'll still be me, Bastien, just immortal, just like you." "The transformation is agony. 3 days of pain unlike anything you can imagine. I can handle it. And if you die, if your body rejects the change, then at least I tried. At least I chose to fight for our future rather than accepting the slow death of old age." She cupped his face. "I'm not afraid, my love. Not with you beside me." Through the bond, she felt his turmoil, the war between his desire to keep her forever and his fear of hurting her. But she also felt his love, overwhelming and absolute. "If we do this," he said finally, "we do it right. We'll prepare your body, make sure you're as strong as possible. We'll have healers standing by, blood reserves ready, and we'll do it somewhere safe, where nothing can interrupt the process." Hope bloomed in her chest. "You'll do it? You'll turn me?" "I'll do it," he confirmed, "because you're right. I want eternity with you, Valentina. I want centuries of your smile, your laugh, your brilliant mind. I want to watch you become the most powerful queen in vampire history." He kissed her deeply. "But we wait 6 months. Give yourself time to be absolutely certain." "I won't change my mind." "Then 6 months won't matter." She agreed, knowing he needed the time as much as she did. They spent those months preparing, strengthening her body through training and careful diet. Bastien taught her everything she would need to know about being a vampire, the hunger, the enhanced senses, the eternal night. She met with vampires who had been turned later in life, learning about their experiences. And through it all, her resolve never wavered. When the 6 months ended, they held a private ceremony. Just Valentina, Bastien, Isadora, and Marcus, who had reluctantly accepted his daughter's choice. "Take care of her," Marcus said to Bastien, tears in his eyes. "Even after she's turned, she's still my little girl. I'll guard her with my existence," Bastien promised. "You have my word." They said their goodbyes, emotional and heartfelt. Then Valentina lay down on the bed in their most secure room, and Bastien knelt beside her. "Last chance," he said softly. "We can still stop this." "I love you," she replied. "Turn me, make me yours forever." He bent to her throat, his fangs extending. "This will hurt," he warned. "I know." Then he bit down, and liquid fire poured into her veins. The pain was immediate and absolute. She screamed as her body began to die, every cell fighting the vampire venom flooding her system. Bastien held her down as she convulsed, whispering words of love and encouragement, but she could barely hear him over her own screaming. The first day was agony. The second was worse. By the third day, she was delirious with pain, crying and begging for it to stop. But Bastien never left her side, feeding her his blood when she needed it, cooling her fevered skin, anchoring her to the world when she wanted to let go. And then, on the dawn of the 4th day, the pain stopped. Valentina opened her eyes to a world transformed. Colors were brighter, sounds sharper, scents more complex. She could hear heartbeats in the building below, could smell the rain coming from miles away. And when she looked at Bastien, she could see him in perfect detail, every eyelash, every pore, every beautiful inch of him. "You made it," he breathed, awe in his voice. "You survived." She sat up slowly, marveling at the strength in her body, the power humming under her skin. When she caught sight of herself in the mirror, she gasped. Her skin had paled to porcelain, her features sharper and more defined. Her eyes gleamed red like rubies. She looked like a vampire queen. "How do you feel?" Bastien asked. She turned to him, and the bond between them flared so brightly it was almost blinding. She could feel him completely now, every thought and emotion, as if they shared one soul. "Alive," she said, and laughed at the irony. "More alive than I've ever been." He pulled her into his arms, and she felt his joy, his relief, his overwhelming love. "Welcome to eternity, my queen." She kissed him, and it was different now, 2 immortals meeting as equals. The power between them crackled and sparked, their bond settling into something new and profound. "Forever," she whispered against his lips. "We have forever." "Forever," he agreed. 20 years later, Valentina Sinclair stood on the balcony of their home, looking out over the city she'd come to love. The vampire world had changed dramatically in 2 decades, and she'd been at the center of that change. She'd established the first vampire-human council, bringing together leaders from both communities to negotiate peace. She'd created sanctuaries where humans could donate blood willingly, ending the need for violent feeding. She'd written laws protecting both species, building a framework for coexistence that was being adopted worldwide. She'd become exactly what Bastien had predicted, the most powerful queen in vampire history. But more than that, she'd remained herself. Still kind, still compassionate, still fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The transformation had made her stronger, faster, immortal, but it hadn't changed her heart. Arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into Bastien's embrace. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured against her hair. "How far we've come. How much has changed. Any regrets?" She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had been her husband, her partner, her everything for over 20 years. "Not a single one." He smiled, and she saw the same joy in his eyes that she felt in her heart. They'd faced so much together. Wars, political upheaval, the challenges of blending 2 worlds. But through it all, they'd had each other. I love you, she said, the words as true now as they'd been the first time she'd spoken them. I love you, he replied. My brave queen, my eternal partner. She kissed him as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Somewhere below, humans and vampires lived and worked together, building a future neither species could have imagined a generation ago. And it had all started with a terrified girl walking into a vampire court, begging for her father's life. Bastien had taken her hand that night and made her his wife. She'd taken his heart and made him human again, in all the ways that mattered. They'd saved each other, and they would spend eternity continuing to do so, one day at a time, one challenge at a time, together in the darkness and the light. Marcus Everett passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, surrounded by the daughter he loved and the vampire king who had become like a son to him. He died knowing Valentina was happy, that she'd found her place in the world, that she'd become someone extraordinary. At his funeral, Valentina stood between Bastien and Isadora, dry-eyed but grieving deeply. Vampires didn't cry, but the bond allowed Bastien to feel every wave of her sorrow, and he held her hand tightly through the entire service. He was proud of you, Isadora said softly afterwards. He told me so just last week. Said you'd exceeded every dream he'd ever had for you. Valentina managed a small smile. He was a good father, the best. He was, Bastien agreed. And he'll be remembered with honor in our court. I'll make sure of it. True to his word, Bastien commissioned a memorial in the court gardens, a statue of Marcus with a plaque detailing his service to the vampire community and his role in bridging the gap between species. It became a place where humans and vampires both came to pay their respects, a symbol of what they'd built together. The grief faded slowly, as grief does, but Valentina never forgot her father or the sacrifice he'd inadvertently made that led her to Bastien. In a way, Marcus had given her everything, the chance to become who she was meant to be, the opportunity to find love beyond her wildest dreams, and the courage to take risks for the people she cared about. She honored his memory by continuing her work, by being the queen he'd been so proud of, by living the eternal life he'd wanted for her fully and completely. Years continued to pass, decades. The world changed around them, technology advancing, societies shifting, but Bastien and Valentina remained constant. They traveled the world together, visiting other vampire territories, exploring human cultures, experiencing everything immortality had to offer. They faced new challenges too. Rogue vampires who rejected the new peace, human extremists who still feared their kind, political machinations from other courts. But they handled each obstacle together, their bond making them stronger than any threat. On their 50th wedding anniversary, Bastien took Valentina back to the cathedral hall where they'd first met. It had been preserved exactly as it was, a historical site for the vampire community. Do you remember that night? He asked, standing in the spot where his throne had once been. Every second of it, Valentina replied. I was so scared. I thought I was going to die. Instead, you found life. He pulled her close. We both did. She looked around the hall, remembering the terrified girl she'd been, the desperate bargain she'd made. It felt like a lifetime ago. It had been a lifetime ago, her human lifetime, traded for something so much more. If you could go back, Bastien asked softly, knowing everything that would happen, would you still walk through those doors? Valentina didn't even have to think about it. Every single time. I'd make the same choice every single time. He kissed her then, deep and loving, and through their bond, she felt his absolute devotion, his eternal love, his gratitude for the gift of her presence in his existence. They'd found each other in darkness, two souls searching for connection in a world that often felt too cold, too hard, too lonely. And they'd built something beautiful together. A love that transcended species, a partnership that changed the world, a bond that would last forever. The vampire king had taken her hand and made her his wife. She'd taken his heart and made him whole. And they'd lived happily ever after, in the truest sense of the words. Not without struggle, not without pain, but always together. Always choosing each other, day after day, year after year, century after century, forever, just as they'd promised.